Well, good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever corner of the world you're joining. Thank you for joining today's virtual conference, How Industrial Players Can Efficiently Respond to Technology Disruption Driven by IoT. Brought to you by IoT World and sponsored by Siemens. So I'm Lucian, and I'm the co-founder of IoT World. And on behalf of the speakers, the sponsors, thank you for joining. I'd like this to be one of the most interactive virtual events you've attended so far. So for that, I encourage you to post questions in the Q&A, and we'll reward one of you will get actually access to the VIP community for 1 year. That's a $999 value, where you can track the speakers, get advanced visibility into the events, as well as exclusive C-level interviews. So the announcement will take place tomorrow, 3 p.m. Via LinkedIn Live. Paul, Demi, Carolina will be monitoring the channels. If you post your question on Twitter or LinkedIn, leverage the hashtag SIE_IIoT. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Greg Orloff, who will host this virtual conference. Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Lucian, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Now, before we dive into today's materials, please allow me to give those of you who are joining us for the first time a little bit of background. IIoT World is a digital media publication and leading authority on industrial IoT across the globe. We focus on delivering daily intelligence on the IIoT, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, predictive analytics, digital disruption, autonomous cars and vehicles, cybersecurity, machine learning, and smart cities. We're a global digital media outlet sharing IIoT news with more than 200,000 decision makers across manufacturing, energy, smart infrastructure, cities, and buildings. Through our global community, over 300 industry experts create a culture of innovation by connecting the smarts. That is industrial technology, manufacturing, sensors, and the CXO decision makers who seek these solutions. Analytica's 2020 report ranked IIoT World as the #1 global brand for industrial IoT. IIoT World was also recently ranked by Kcore Analytics as the #1 global influencer on several topics, including industrial IoT, smart manufacturing, ICS security, SCADA, predictive analytics, and predictive maintenance. Additionally, smart cities has been in the top 5 for the past several years. Today, we're joined by representatives from Gartner and Siemens, and they are poised to provide keen insights into the ever-transforming world of industrial IoT. There are many industry and technology changes that companies need to understand and determine how to effectively address. These industrial disruptions not only impact the company, but the extended value chain, and more importantly, the customers. One of the key sources driving this disruption is the industrial Internet of Things, or as we refer to it, IIoT. IIoT bridges the IT world and the OT world, leveraging cloud and data-driven technologies. So if you're an executive looking to further leverage technology to address the challenges in your business, or perhaps you're looking to get started on the digitalization journey, this event is for you. Key topics covered in this interactive session with Gartner and Siemens will span recent trends such as leveraging data analysis to make data-driven decisions from the factory floor and in the field assets and devices. The changes in workforce skills and expectations required to adapt and thrive in these uncertain times. Impacts of higher customer expectations of tailored and personalized experiences. And how social responsibility in building, delivering, and servicing product factors into a global economy responding to a pandemic. I'd like to kick off our session today by introducing Sri Chailavada, who's a managing partner at Gartner. Sri is a product strategy, management, and marketing technology executive with over 20 years of experience in infrastructure and software and hardware technology markets, with specialization in DevOps, DevSecOps, AIOps, IIoT, and edge computing. He manages a global infrastructure software and hardware portfolio. Sri executes product strategy, product management lifecycle, and product marketing engagements for GMs, VPs of strategy, and CMOs. Sri, I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks for this opportunity to share some of the key insights that we're seeing in the marketplace. With that, Greg, if you want to go to the next slide, is it Lucian who is actually conducting this? So I have 5 key insights that I want to share with you today. We're in a global pandemic right now. The pandemic is actually impacting different geographies, different markets in very different ways. So we're actually seeing some patterns in terms of how some of the buying behaviors are changing. We would like to talk about that. And if nothing else, rest assured, pandemic COVID-19 is accelerating digital transformation than it was before. So we'll touch on some of those key behaviors, key buying behaviors that actually enable you to succeed in the marketplace. Second key insight. There were days when the IoT was actually used for exploratory purposes, pilots. You're really trying to figure out what IoT really means. Those days are gone. Those days are history. Now, every IoT initiative should be focused on business and operational priority improvements. More importantly, these are not long stretched engagements anymore. These should be driving ROIs within 1 year or 18-month periods. So the second key insights that we want to talk about is how do you actually take some of your IoT initiatives, help align with business and operational priorities, and enable these process improvements. Third key initiative is the fact that IoT fundamentally generates a lot of data. It actually generates new insights as it relates to the business processes and as it relates to your customers. While IoT has been focused on operational excellence and new revenue streams, we'll actually look at how IoT is creating new value drivers. For example, you have all this data. What do you do with this data? You can actually use this data to either sell or to transition your products to service-based business models, as well as you actually use this data to be able to drive new engagement models internally and externally. So we'll actually talk about some of the new areas that IoT is actually kind of expanding and delivering value. Fourth, there is no IoT presentation that is complete without a digital twin. Digital twin is one of the key initiatives that every one of the IoT enterprises that are actually implementing IoT are actually implementing. However, the scope is continually increasing. There are two key things that we would like to talk about in the digital twins, which is life cycle enablement of digital twin. And the second thing that we want to talk about is integration challenges across the digital twins. Those are the two areas of pain points, and you can actually kind of take advantage of those two areas to drive revenue streams. And finally, IoT is about digitization. At the end of the day, what IoT does is actually connect all these billions of devices into the internet. So what do you do next? You need to actually augment your IoT capabilities with artificial intelligence. I'm sure that every one of you are doing it. But in addition, we also are looking at new use cases that actually capitalize on not only the artificial intelligence, but also the blockchain. So we'll talk about all these 5 areas in a way to drive your revenue streams going into the future. Next slide. So what is happening today? One of the key things that we talk about in COVID-19 is that the pandemic is actually impacting all the geographies and markets in a very different way. So for example, I was talking to one of my colleagues in Australia. They said, it doesn't feel like we have a COVID-19, but I'm in San Francisco where I'm actually working from my home for a long time. So these key patterns that we're actually seeing is broad-based, but please make sure to understand that the pandemic is actually impacting the markets in different ways. 3 key insights that I want to share with you on this particular slide. Every single time we go through a disruption in the marketplace, very quickly enterprises are actually kind of leaning towards cost optimization. They're actually saying, well, we don't want to do cost cutting, but what we want to do is being surgical about our technology investments and how do those technology investments reduce total cost of ownership, cost to serve, and how does it actually improve business outcomes and do more with less. That is the first key insight. The second key insight, it is on every one of the CEO's minds to improve compliance and employee safety. You do not want to go into a workplace threatened with the fact that you might actually kind of contract the virus. And employers are actually looking at deploying technologies, taking advantage of the current technologies to be able to improve the employee safety and hence the compliance and employee safety are top of the mind for business executives. Why is this? Because the compliance, the regulations are changing very quickly, and they need to keep up with these regulations as quickly as they change to ensure employee safety. The last thing that I want to talk about is the vertical market expertise. When we talk about IoT, it is a foregone conclusion for a lot of the vendors that vertical market expertise is critical, and it has become even more critical. Why is this important? You cannot just take a technology, and this is not a horizontal technology, right? You are taking these technologies to be able to drive business outcomes. When you're driving the business outcomes, you need to bring in the vertical market expertise. You need to be able to demonstrate to your customers that you have done this in the past, and you have a set of capabilities that you can bring to forefront to drive these business outcomes. So vertical market expertise is becoming a must-have to drive the ROI, to demonstrate your understanding of the marketplace, and to be able to align with the business outcomes. Okay, that is the first key insight. So let's go to the next key insight. These are, I think at this point, when we talk about digital transformation, everybody talks broadly about digital transformation, but one thing they miss is what is digital optimization. The first thing when we talk about digital transformation, a lot of the organizations are really talking about optimization. On the left, you're seeing a number of key initiatives. And again, we're in a very tough situations, uncertain times. This is becoming important. How do you use digital technologies to optimize your assets? Either it's assets, physical assets, human assets, and the processes that you have that you bring to bear to your customers. So we're actually seeing a number of key initiatives that are driving digital optimization and the KPIs that demonstrate digital optimization. And towards the right, we talk about transformation. So now let us think about it for a second. It's not like the CEOs are actually kind of getting a lot more money because these are global economies. The budgets on the IT is continually reducing or growing in a single digit. Why? How can you drive digital transformation? The first thing that you do is you optimize. You actually drive digital optimization, and these are a set of initiatives and the KPIs. And by the savings that you actually drive with this digital optimization, you're actually taking all the money and putting it into a digital transformation, vis-a-vis driving new revenue streams, new businesses, new customer experiences. The reason why some of these things are important is because the exploratory types of engagements saying, well, you could achieve these outcomes is really not that important. Enterprises do not have time or patience to actually do any exploratory initiatives. What they really want from a service provider or even an internal stakeholder is to demonstrate, one, how is your initiative aligned with business priority? How is your initiative driving operational and business outcomes as it relates to those KPIs here? And the third thing, I don't want to wait 3 years to actually kind of get the outcomes. I really want you to demonstrate as an internal stakeholder or an external service provider that you're actually showing improvements every 6 months. The ROI, the time period for the ROI has reduced, as we talked about on the previous slide, which is reduced from 3 years to a year or 18 months. So you really need to be razor focused on the business priorities and operational priorities here, as well as the key elements of the KPIs that you're demonstrating that these IoT initiatives are going to help you achieve. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So when we look at IoT, we talk a lot about, if you look at majority of the information that you see on the internet, is the middle two columns, operational model innovation. This is what we call digital optimization. Product or service innovation, this is what we call digital transformation. So these are the two areas where we have significant amounts of value demonstrated, case studies outlined, and business cases developed. But now there are two additional ways that companies are actually looking to drive and unlock value. So let's take, for example, the value model innovation. What is a value model innovation? At the end of the day, IoT, if done right, if implemented right, is generating a lot of data. lot of data that actually gives you new sets of insights. What do you do with these new sets of insights? You can make a business out of those new sets of insights. Either you're actually selling those insights to your customers. We talk about your credit score as a very simple example, but you can actually take some of those ways of unlocking those insights and selling to your customers. Second, you actually convert your product-based revenue streams to a service-based revenue streams. Now you have a way of actually kind of telemetricizing your services to be able to offer better value. And the third is outcome-based initiatives. So we talk about outcome-based initiatives within healthcare. Now, IoT is actually making a lot of those things possible. So there are new ways to unlock the insights, the value that comes with the data that IoT is generating. That is one area that you should be actually looking at as companies are actually looking to unlock value. On the flip side, now we have all these insights about your customers, about your partners, about all the different insights that you see. So now taking all those insights, what can you do better? So you're actually kind of saying, can I actually use a lot of patterns in the back to drive collaboration and culture internally within my employees? Maybe there are some bots that actually automatically close some trouble tickets, for example, so that it is actually improving the productivity of your employees internally. Or you can actually take some of those insights to be able to drive new ways of engagement models. For example, we're actually talking about customer service bots that know customer patterns. The second thing is bots that are actually kind of helping the elderly, and the bots for kids. These are friendlies. So there are new ways that you're actually kind of using all of the data to create value model innovation and relationship and interactions-based innovation. Those are some new areas that we're seeing emergence. And those are some of the areas that you should be thinking and keeping an open mind as you charter your roadmaps into the future. Next slide. So like I said, digital twin. Everybody knows digital twin. There is not a whole lot new I'm going to tell about digital twin to this audience that you don't already know. There are things that you are actually kind of seeing here is the scope is actually increasing. Let me actually kind of lay this out for you. A lot of the digital twin initiatives today are siloed. Either you're focused on equipment, either you're focused on personnel. There are so many ways you're actually kind of driving digital twin initiatives. 80% of the enterprises are already implementing digital twin initiatives. And by the way, more than one. So now what do you do with it? The second key area of implementation is now you have implemented the digital twin. The second area of focus is how do you create a life cycle approach to a digital twin? At this point, you have actually driven the digital twin, but in the physical world, things are changing. You're actually creating new components, adding new machinery, all of those things. So how do you take all of these adjustments and make sure that your digital twin is continuously evolving? That is one area of implementation for enterprises. They're actually saying, well, we did this. We have to continually do it. Can we do it more continuously? Can we do it more real time? That is one area of innovation that we're seeing in the marketplace. The second area, as we actually kind of look at it, these digital twins are in a systems world, in a very complex systems world. If you integrate all of those things, you are really creating a digital twin for an auto manufacturer. It is at a level of a business application. You are actually kind of creating all these digital twins, integrating them to create a holistic system to be able to optimize. So what are the challenges? These digital twins are today siloed. Integration becomes a big challenge. Every complex initiatives, when you do these things in silos, integration is becoming a big challenge. So how do you actually kind of make sure that you are not actually getting into these challenges? The data models, the taxonomies, the critical capabilities that you really need to achieve this digital twin, a mega digital twin at an organization level, requires new sets of capabilities, new sets of disciplines to address the complexity of the digital twin. And by the way, the reason why we are doing all of these things is you're seeing outcomes at each one of those digital twins. You're able to drive outcomes and you're able to optimize at a systems level. And that really is the holy grail for digital twin. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. IoT, everybody knows IoT is about digitization. What do you do with IoT? In a non-digital world, you really are actually kind of connecting all these systems to the internet and you're really digitizing them. Now you have all of this data. So a lot of the implementations actually start with, okay, did we digitize it for you? Can we actually kind of do a device management to be able to connect all these devices for you? That is where majority of the implementations are, and that's okay, because enterprises need to digitize before they actually get to a better business outcome. So now we are way past digitization. A lot of the implementations are actually saying now we have connected all these systems together. Now what? Now we are actually kind of complementing IoT and AI. And that is also mainstream today, because you are actually kind of taking a lot of the AI to be able to optimize your systems. Without those insights, you could not actually do it. Now IoT and AI, there are new sets of use cases that are coming into realization by the enterprises. And more importantly, the blockchain is becoming an enabler. In a complex system with significant security challenges, and in a world of zero trust security, how do you manage security and trust in these implementations? Blockchain seems to be the answer. So now, as you actually chart new phase of driving markets, don't just stop at IoT. IoT needs to be complemented with AI capabilities. AI and IoT should be complemented with blockchain, because at the end of the day, the complex systems with significant risk requires trust and security. And IoT, AI, and blockchain is a game changer. Having those capabilities enables your organization to not only implement complex initiatives, but also drive new ways of driving business outcomes. With that, Lucian, I'll actually kind of transition back to you.
Great, thank you, Sri. The fact that ROI is decreased by such a large factor really stuck out to me. I mean, you're taking something from a 3-year ROI down to within under a year, 6 to 18 months. That's a testament to the rapid expansion and acceleration of industrial IoT. So thank you once again. I'd like to introduce Mike Denley, who is the Senior Director of Program Management. And Mr. Michael Denley coordinates and drives cross-organizational alignment between product management, product marketing, and go-to-market teams around Siemens MindSphere IoT platform as a service product releases and go-to-market deliverables across the team, including pricing, packaging, product requirements, field and partner ecosystem readiness. His prior responsibilities included Team Center PLM, Team Center Engineering, Team Center Systems Engineering, Team Center Project, and third-party integrations. A 20-year seasoned professional in the industrial information systems industry, Mr. Denley holds several advanced degrees, including a Master's of Science in Software Design in Systems Industry and Development, a Master's degree in International Marketing, a doctorate in Total Quality Management from KSMB. Mike, excited to hear what you have to say as well. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Greg, for that introduction. I also like to take the time to extend thanks to the audience as well. We have representation across 65 countries. Your choice of investing your time is appreciated here, like all investments where you want a return on that investment. I hope at the end of the session, you'll look back and state that your investment of time had a return, either by learning something new or looking at something a bit differently. Sri shared some industry insights that sets a good basis for understanding. I'd like to build on top of this and with some key disrupting trends. Lucian, could you go to the next slide for me? Hyper-automation. Well, that's a funny term, hyper-automation. Hyper is to go beyond, and automation is the reduction of manual intervention. Together, it's simply the extension of current business processes and respective automation at a comprehensive level, not at an individual process level. Combining artificial intelligence and machine learning tools, as Sri talked about, with these bot technologies and simple automation, hyper-automation promises automation for virtually any repetitive task executed by business users. It even takes it to the next level by automating the automation, by dynamically discovering business processes and creating bots to automate them. At a systems level, we see system of systems, self-healing, and self-contained autonomic options in this area. One of the key enablers, though, is the drive for instrumentation and smart, intelligent devices, machines, or products. Well, we can see how this could lead to major efficiencies and productivity gains with processes and product development and manufacturing. The organization itself can leverage instrumentation and data collection for its own gains. Now, this starts with the mining and collecting and harnessing of data across the organization at interactions and touch points of an end-to-end set of transactions of doing business across the company domains, development, manufacturing, finance, HR, service, etc. With this collected data, we can build what sometimes is referred to as the digital twin of the organization, which is interesting in and of itself. Lucian, if you go into the next slide for me. You know, as we look at another trend here, mass customization and personalized products. You know, one of the underlying items here is shorter technology decisions and adoptions within business domains, along with extending the business services and its connections into the customer environment, sometimes removing the middleman. This is also driving faster innovation and change, and we heard some of that with Sri's insights. The definition of product value is also changing in this business model. As we identified in the previous slide about smart and intelligent technologies that are replacing more legacy and traditional technologies, primarily for the gains in cost savings, productivity, and efficiencies. But with industrial enterprise deploying industrial IoT, their primary objectives are optimizing operations, reducing risk, developing and enhancing products, while increasing sales along with these new business models. But within this trend, there's some really key technology drivers that are making it happen. One of the first is digitalization itself, being able to capture this data. But also what's empowering, enabling that is low-cost sensors, the connectivity options, bandwidth expansion. We're all hearing about 5G as it's coming. But also with that is data capturing and storage, the clouds and analytics. But there's some key business drivers as well. One is the new business models of everything as a service, or XaaS, and this extended ecosystem that starts with, you know, not only at the business, but through the suppliers to the end customer. There's also a paradigm shift fundamental to this, and it's going from a product focus to a user-centric mindset. Now, this is closely aligned to what Gartner refers to as multi-experience, which replaces technology literate people with people literate technology. Now, that's something to get your mind around. Let's go to the next slide. As we talk about these new business models, well, customers are increasingly wanting to buy outcomes and expect new purchasing options. Well, customers are not only businesses, but also the end user customers. This focus is driving innovation across this extended ecosystem and into new business models that include an integrated customer experience, pay-per-use models, and sort of value-added digital services. Companies are seeking to transform digitally and become more agile. Companies are also looking for more flexible consumption or everything as a service model. One of the primary reasons is that it transforms what we know as traditional capital expenditures, CapEx, into OpEx, operating expenses. This allowing for faster purchasing decisions and supporting pay-as-you-go versus outlaying larger investments. Secondly, companies are looking to this everything as a service for cost reduction and cost avoidance benefits. Very interesting sort of set of trends going on. If you go to the next slide, one of the more interesting ones that we are all hearing about is this reduction of carbon footprint. With this, social responsibility, government and regulation compliance are key drivers for businesses and consumers. Consumers are demanding more green products, services, and technology. We're seeing companies position their zero carbon footprint scorecard out in the open as a part of their go-to-market advertisement, boasting of their use of solar power, electric vehicles, remote access, etc. If we go to the next slide, we can see this is also impacting smart manufacturing. Well, smart manufacturing leverages the technology in manufacturing environments to monitor and optimize production processes. It uses IoT, industrial IoT, in conjunction with cloud, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, AI and ML, and other technologies to help organizations automate the operations and improve manufacturing performance. Well, with the advances of cloud technology, which is really making this happen, and the being able to collect large amounts of data, industrial organizations can analyze data streaming off an entire factory worth of machines, or even across multiple facilities in near real time. That's not been able to happen before, and it's going to happen more as we see 5G take a hold in the economy. As smart manufacturing use cases continue to expand, experts in the space are increasingly finding new ways that industrial IoT can disrupt and ultimately reinvent and reposition the industrial sectors around the world. To capitalize on this potential, manufacturers need to become digital enterprises and rethink every element of their business and how it touches the digitalization in this collection of data. Next slide. Well, part of that is this trend of industrial IoT as it's reshaping the manufacturing process and experience. Now, we hear this underneath the Industrial 4.0 initiatives. Those are global initiatives around the world, in China and Europe and in the Americas. Industrial IoT is helping organizations build and grow competitive advantages with greater operational efficiencies, better customer experiences, but really more important, new revenue opportunities with new business models, products, and services. Industrial IoT enables these advantages by allowing manufacturing organizations to capture, analyze, and visualize this key operational data, and then apply computing capabilities in the cloud or on the edge on the shop floor via connectivity across the products and plant systems and machines. This is allowing us to integrate the data from the physical assets and enterprise systems. Companies have then this greater visibility to control their production environments. And it goes beyond the production environments. It actually starts going upstream to the ideation and product requirements. Am I designing the right products? Is it the right requirements for our market? Are customers using it the way I wanted? To the service lifecycle management of how is this product being used in the field? Is it being serviced correctly? What's the mean time between failures? And how do I extend the yield and the life of these products? This data, along with the industrial IoT platform, creates the basis for continuous closed loop feedback to start realizing the value of digitalization across the entire life cycle from the business to the consumer. If you go to the next slide, this actually leads us to sort of the next area. What is this power of closed loop digital twins? We heard Shri talk about digital twins, and just about everybody's doing. 80% of corporations or companies have some initiative started within this area, and it could be in their manufacturing or their product or their organization. We understand that. But what is interesting here, and I'll poke a little bit to Shri and Gartner, is that with other technologies, digital twins have an evolving and moving definition. A quick search will generate a result of dozens of these definitions. And to me, today, most of the definitions of digital twins are typically from vendors, each creating their own definition to highlight their focus and perceived competitive advantage. This is good, this is fine, but each definition is usually shaped by the maturity of their products, solutions, and thought leadership. These multiple definitions may confuse business leaders in their quest to understand the what, the why, and how for their business. And again, this makes it maybe a little bit more difficult to understand what digital twins really are, compare the differences across many offerings, and determine how their business can benefit from digital twins in the design of their products, their service, production, operations, and even service life. But what is key here is that over these many definitions, there are a couple common characteristics. The first is the digital twin is a virtual representation of a physical object. We sort of understand that. But the object can be simple, like a single entity, like a spring or a switch, or more complex hierarchical sets of objects, like systems of systems, like an engine, a pump, or a gearbox, a car, a robot building. You can see the complexity as it's growing across. But the second characteristic is that the digital twin, like the physical object, evolves over time with changes. Now, this is key. Like a product, the digital twin across its life cycle needs to be managed. Additional commonality is the understanding that the use of digital twins and supporting technologies are helping to create actionable insights that improve products, optimize operations, strengthen competitive advantages. I wanted to take this time just thank you for allowing me to share some additional insights and trends that are creating this disruption in the marketplace. Greg, do we have any questions from the audience that Sri and I can address?
Oh, Mike, is that a rhetorical question? Absolutely.
A little bit rhetorical, yes.
Absolutely. Thank you once again. There's a tremendous amount of information in there. It's always fascinating to me to see the growing interest and how it shifts around sustainability and renewable initiatives and how that's growing in importance, not only at the production side, but also now at the consumer side. 80% of a heightened concern level or importance from the EU is definitely something that's insightful. So great presentation. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to now transition to the Q&A and the interactive discussion portion of today's session, and we'll entertain the questions that are coming in from the audience. Thank you folks for submitting, and don't be shy. So, and as a reminder, we have two options for doing that. You can submit the questions via the Q&A portal here. You can also send them in via Twitter using the hashtag SIE_IIoT. And to answer the questions that are coming up as well, yes, the content from today's presentations will be made available after the event. So stay tuned
as well
for
as
that.
the questions, right, Greg?
Absolutely, and the questions will too. So if we don't get to those questions during the session, we will roll that conversation over to you via Twitter or via social media platforms as well. So
that's good, because I'm looking for Shari's answers.
I know, exactly. It's interesting. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, about the emergency or crisis response plans that the businesses that I've run or managed teams on and been a part of, I can almost guarantee you that the table of contents would not have listed a response to a crisis centering on bacterial or viral infections. So,
absolutely.
I mean, you fast forward to today's environment, and companies are working to make their organizations not only crisis-proof but pandemic-proof, and that is a tangled web and a deep hole. So maybe I'll kick off a question here. What type of an impact has COVID-19 had on the IoT movement globally? I'll throw that out to both of you, whoever wants to jump in first and tag it.
Sure. Well, let me just start out, because we're all living it. It's an experiment of design that's going on. Nobody really has the answers, but one of those really interesting things is there is this paradigm shift of the placement of the worker, right? With the COVID lockdown, we talked about, Shari's out of San Francisco, I'm out of Minneapolis. And so there's no co-location space anymore, right? At the end of the day, right? Co-location is gone. Corporate offices are now being replaced with home offices, which is driving significant reduction in costs. And I make a joke about this, is that once finance knows that they can reduce costs, they make sure that they can keep on reducing costs, right? So energy costs and building and real estate, right? And so now they're rethinking what the office needs are. And you're hearing a lot of change in the market, especially like in insurance companies and even at Siemens, where work at home is the norm now. So we're seeing this change. This is also rethinking about what the home office is. My joke here is home office could be the lake office now, right? Because the mobility of workers, or that's what's happening. Well, because of this mobility, and this is somewhere Shari can actually help with a little bit more, is this greater investment in collaboration tools, VPN, video conferencing that we're using now, application and document sharing. You see Zoom as we're using, or the Teams or Skype is blossoming, right? Everybody's got a collaboration tool. Shari, what do you think? What's your views here?
Yeah, so I think there are, maybe the way I would like to structure it is more by the time scale. So when we actually kind of got to the February or March, I think a lot of what we developed, I think I actually kind of remember somebody saying, just take all of your 2020 strategy plans and put it in a trash can and create a new one.
Yeah.
They just said,
Reboot.
we don't know what we do with it, right? So in February, March timeframe, everybody started actually, to your point, Mike, it was always in a firefighting mode. You're actually saying, do I even have the right network capacity to be able to do it? You really need that. A lot of the factory workers in the industrial IoT space, they don't have mobile devices, either it's phones or laptops. There are places that digitization and digital enablement accelerated because people didn't know how long it was going to be, and they really needed to make employees more productive. So that is where we were, and it actually kind of took at least 3 months or 4 months to get there. Then we started actually kind of coming to the June, July timeframe when some of the regulations started kicking in. Either it's the CDC regulations or, the health and human services regulations. These are all kind of kicking in and saying, these are all the different things that you need to be able to open your offices safely, right? Then you're actually kind of looking at how do you actually kind of drive compliance. I think a lot of the enterprises are, trying to do the best they can to provide better employee safety, compliance, because to some extent, Mike, I think, you're absolutely right. The pendulum has swung so far to the left to say, well, you're working from home, but there are still a lot of activities that needs your presence in the factory floor, for example.
Yep.
So now you're actually kind of saying, how do you actually kind of make it better? And I still see a lot of non-digital ways of doing it because you can't really build new systems. All of the new systems, it just takes time, and you really need to do it today. Either you're doing it in a very easier way of mobile applications, or you're actually kind of having a checklist to actually kind of go through it. Now we have gone through that right now. Now we're actually kind of coming back to this new normal, if you will. So where do we go from here? How do we optimize our systems now that we are more digitally savvy? We actually enabled a lot of people to work from home. Well, we thought at least everybody should be at the office. Maybe 20% of the people never needed to be in the office. So can I reduce the real estate cost, to your point? Can I reduce the footprint? Can I let them work from home? Can I also enable employees to drive more collaboration? Because if you're working from home with constant interactions with your family and everything, it's always a challenge. How do you kind of get them to working, and what are cooler conversations? How do you actually kind of drive these new ways of working? I think that's where we are. I think it's very interesting when I say that a lot of my experiences and a lot of what we're seeing in the marketplace is prejudiced with where I am, which is United States, but it's not. All things are not equal. All geos, verticals are not equal. There are verticals where they're actually investing a lot because those are growth markets. And then also the second thing, the last thing that I would actually kind of say is how the one thing that everybody is actually kind of looking at is the whole overall supply chain. It is either humans in the offices or the factory floors. You're actually kind of looking at the supply chain and saying, how do we get to bounce back to the new normal? How do we enable the enterprises? It's a long-winded answer, but I think we are not done yet. We're still figuring it out. The system is getting better, in my opinion, and that's always the hope. But I think there are opportunities. Definitely, there are a lot of strains in the system that we're actually kind of encountering. Hopefully, we're actually kind of getting to a more positive outlook of saying, now we need to really produce. We're in a consumption-based economy. How do we drive production? And that's where we are right now.
Yeah. I'd like to just add a couple of things. One of the interesting things from just I'll say a market point of view, we're seeing different purchase patterns, and we know about the impacts of business travel and air and car rental and all those kind of things, but there's other shifts to the home office. And so now we're seeing, sort of the buildup of, the webcams and the printers and the laptops going from home. That's interesting. And in fact, for a while there, you couldn't even get a webcam because it was all backlogged because so many people were from home. Well, one of the more interesting things is this hiring growth. We hear about a lot of businesses and a lot of people are out of work, and that's unfortunate. And hopefully we're able to bounce back, and countries are doing that. But there's really a great hiring growth by companies in existing focuses, as you saying, Sri, healthcare, financial services, cloud connectivity, digital marketing, online commerce and distribution. I mean, people, looking at what's happening at, Amazon.com and such, right? And there's a greater demand for these core products and services. In fact, what I just read an article, Kid even came from Gartner about this is doubling. This hiring growth is doubling during the shutdown. In 6 months, we're seeing these existing companies like healthcare going down and building more. But one of the interesting things that's actually changing, and it goes along with one of your statements, is there's this underlying theme of contactless transactions, right? Now we're seeing that in telehealth, right? Now you set up an appointment with the doctor via your iPad, right? Or contactless payments. But also other interesting things that we're seeing in the factory floor, like 3D printing. No longer do I need to work with the supplier. They actually send me the NC instructions and I print it right on my shop floor. That is interesting, right? And so we're starting to see that in the automotive industry and the aerospace industry. So just an interesting way to look at this digital value chain as you talked about.
Absolutely. Quite kind of pivoting on that, Mike, building on those thoughts in terms of the modus operandi of organizations. I mean, the paradigm is shifting, right? For workforce, from the remote standpoint we're talking about. A couple questions have come in from the folks. Veripin was asking, what would be the name of an IoT expert or an IoT expert in the coming days? So in as much as you're seeing this blurring of the folks that are doing these blurring of roles between engineering and some of these other things, what are some of the titles, the role, how is this interplay going to pan out? I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, let me just start out again and to sort of set in the groundwork. One of the main things that we're seeing, especially with the lockdown, is an increase of education. That's interesting. So people are going out to Amazon, they're going out to Microsoft, they're becoming certified in these digitalization technologies, IoT, building low-code apps, because that's one of the major changes, again, are trying to get this value that Sri talked about faster. But, as we look at this evolution of the workforce, one of the major changes that we're seeing is the shifting of traditional IT and the rise of what we call citizen engineering, or I think Gartner would call it the democratization of technology, right? Providing people with easier ways to, technology and business expertise, right? We start looking at low-code applications, faster time to applications. Business people, we're starting to talk about, instead of having data scientists, now we're talking about citizen scientists, where they're actually able to use this instrumentation data at the desktop to build these applications or gain this insight. That's a really interesting phenomena here in this workforce evolution. Sri, what do you think? What's your
Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right, Mike. I think, in addition to what you're saying, I think the way I kind of think about it is structurally we have two organizations, right? One is IT organization and another is OT organization. They are coming together. They're starting to create a better integrated whole to drive these outcomes with industrial IoT, because oftentimes I always kind of think about IT as like, okay, they're not mission critical. These are ERP systems, but on the OT side, these are mission critical systems. So from a cultural standpoint, there is a lot more integration, governance that actually going to bring these two organizations together. But then the third element is what you talked about, Mike, which is expanding the scope of what they do. Because AI is new, IoT is new. A lot of the people, they just do things either on intuitive, or they have a lot of experience. They have done it in the last 20 years. They just say, well, go do this. Now, everybody is data-driven decision-making is becoming important. Everybody who is actually kind of is making a decision at a scale with complex systems are asking this question, how do I enable frontline workers to be able to use the data to be able to optimize their decision-making? So I think those are the three in my mind that's actually going to come together. Is IT and OT, they're actually kind of integrating together. On top of it, they're actually expanding the scope of skills, if you will, to be more data-based decision-making. And finally, the one thing that I'll actually kind of say, and this is a continual challenge for me as a knowledge worker, is you're always learning something new. It's like the technology, the pace of technology is like, I remember one comment that somebody made, which is the technology is the new innovations in technology are 3 times as fast as a human can consume a technology. Yeah. That is how fast the technologies are growing. As a knowledge worker, and a lot of the people who are actually kind of getting to a knowledge worker-based, service-based industries, continual learning and continual education is becoming a critical enabler for you to take advantage of these new opportunities.
Yeah, just a couple comments. One of the interesting things around this IoT is, as we look at, here's another sort of measure of this expansion that you talk about of knowledge and how to keep up with this. And a couple years ago, if you looked at a hyperscaler, AWS or Microsoft or even IBM Cloud, but let's talk about AWS. About 2 years ago, they announced at their annual event around 75 new services. Last year was like 75, right? And Microsoft was similar. It quadrupled in 9 to 12 months. It's just, how do you have time to keep up with that? Now, one of the changes that is really kind of interesting that you talked about is extending this ecosystem. And we looked at a few years ago we had inside business analysts, right? They were sort of the liaison between the technical people and the business people, right? They translated, right? Oh, how do I take these business requirements and translate them into IT? Well, what's happening, and at least what we're seeing, is the customer is getting engaged earlier in the life cycle of the product. So what's happening is that it's a shift left of the customer, not as the consumer, but actually as part of the product design, right? And so these analyst type roles that were in the middle, like the middleman or middle person, actually are now being replaced with the actual customer. That is interesting. And then in the supply chain, the OEMs, let's call it, are basically looking at these suppliers to actually innovate along with them and carry some of the risk along with them, which is really interesting. So we're changing this whole changing the innovation way. I talked about this faster pace because of that. I think that's one of the interesting things we see. And again, it's an evolution of these workforces.
The one additional thing that I would actually make, Mike, is we are seeing a lot of these initiatives have been executed as projects.
Yes.
Now we are taking a product orientation. What I mean by that is few things that are becoming very important. Agile has always been there. Agile development is important. The second thing, customer empathy, we talk about design thinking, is becoming a very critical element. And the third element is, with this rapid innovation cycles, what you really want to do is you are outcome based. Every quarter, you need to show me some kind of progress. It's in some ways a venture capital model.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. The financing models for a particular product evolution, we're not talking about project anymore because there's significant technology debt that you are actually kind of encompassing by these complex systems. So now you cannot treat it as a project, you need to treat it as a product. Mm-hmm. And because you're treating it as a product, you really need to show me your roadmap every 3 months and a set of KPIs that you're actually achieving. Otherwise, you cannot move forward. So I think in some ways, these are all, complex transformational items, if you will. But I think there is a lot of productivity gains that we're actually seeing through a lot of these new ways of working, if you will, right? And that's what I'm saying. I'm actually saying we're in a very initial stages, but I think some of these things are going to be important for a lot of us. Again, we need to be employed in the long run, so we need to be learning a lot of these new technologies, and it is important to kind of keep ourselves more in sync with what the market is actually expecting from us.
Yeah, just a follow-on comment. You mentioned this venture capital mindset, the VC mindset. My joke a little bit here is that, we're now on this return on investment constantly, right? And my joke a little bit is that 2 quarters of uptrend is not a trend, but one downturn is. So what are you going to do about it, right? And it happens in this finance meetings all the time, right? Finance is helping to drive the business now, which is unfortunate some days. Nothing against finance people, but it's hard some days.
Risk adversity always plays into that, right? It's the upside versus the downside.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's fascinating. There's a lot of questions coming in around, and we're trying to work through these, folks. So fear not. The digital twin concept and data-driven implementations. Folks have got a lot of questions. So as we kind of dive into that maybe a little bit more, let's see here. Yeah, Rathan's got kind of a general question that I think we've
Okay.
touched on, but maybe elaborate on a little bit. Is new solutions like Industry 4.0, IoT in a post-COVID era, where manufacturers are struggling to get back on their feet.
Yeah.
What can you guys see from the front lines? What type of initiative, what actions are they engaging in?
Well, let me just, of course, Siemens is a powerhouse of factory automation. I mean, that's part of our core business. And of course, we have factories around the world. One of the first changes, well, it's actually an evolution, as Sri talks about, but it's more focused, is first of all, it's truly understanding the cost associated at the factory floor. Does that make sense a little bit? We typically see things like OEE, the optimization and tack time across these, the workstations of the product lines. But now we're looking at sort of the advances of understanding what's happening at each of the machines and each of the lines and each of the factories with greater intensity of how to cut out and do this agile or the lean. So one of the first things that they're doing is getting a hold of what's actually happening on the manufacturing floor. It's not enough to say, I need 100 widgets today. I manufactured them at 3%, scrap. It is now saying, why is it 3% scrap? Why isn't it 0.5%, right? And why is that machine not living up? And the other thing that's happening is that they're not stopping at the machine itself. One of the major things is the energy consumption of that machine, and aligning that energy consumption with the I'll say the power grid that's coming into the machine, so that you can actually now start scheduling your work at the lowest economic times of buying power. Does that make sense? I mean, that's one of the bigger changes. The other changes that we're seeing is this mass customization at a unit lot of one, smaller runs, but with the smart capability of allowing this tailoring for each customer, but a smaller, I don't need to have volume to actually have economics. And so that's allowing the manufacturing lines to actually tailor what they actually do to reach the market, the larger market, but actually allow for one. And the only way we can do that is actually understand my costs associated with actually producing and running those machines. And so we're starting to see this mass customization. I use the example of 3D printing as one of those ways, right, to be able to reduce that. Sri, what do you?
One thing, yeah, no, Mike, a lot of what you said resonates with what I'm seeing in the marketplace. A couple of things that I want to actually kind of at least maybe stress on is cost. We keep going back to the cost optimization. I think that's unfortunately that is the reality. I kind of think about the cost optimization in three different ways, right? One of which is you are creating more risk appropriated contracts to manage risk with your partners. That is always one. So how do you take costs out, because the consumption has reduced drastically, right? So you're actually kind of saying, hey, partners, work with us to be able to manage the risk, because at the end of the day, we all get the returns. We all need to manage the risk. So these are risk managed contracts is becoming a reality. Second is, how do you get more out of the assets that you have right now? We talk about predictive maintenance. We talk about a lot of those things, but now there is razor focus on, yes, you have promised me all of these things. When are you going to deliver it? You have been telling me for the last 2 years that the predictive maintenance is coming. Do it right now. This is your time for you to deliver return on assets. And the third thing, to your point, is the contactless, right? Automation, remote monitoring, all of those things are really actually becoming important. In some ways, what's happening to the system, unfortunately, is there's always a pressure to manage costs, right? That's the only thing that you can do, and that's the only thing that you have under control in these situations. The challenge is, how do you surgically remove costs in and around the system when you know that there is a lot of opportunities, and that's becoming a reality. Unfortunately, that's a reality. And if you are in the front lines, if you are in any one of those initiatives, what you need to be able to say, and I think a lot of people I'm sure that are able to say it, is because we talked about a lot of those things. Now let's demonstrate to the business that we're going to show you the cost can be taken out from our partners, risk managed. Second, from the processes, everything that have been focused, let me demonstrate to you that we're able to achieve more with less with assets. And then let me actually use remote technologies to improve productivity. those are really broad sense because I think every pattern is very different. But I believe that there is a lot of innovations across all those three categories that Mike, that you alluded to, which is again, can we get more out of the assets? Can we serve our customers better? Those kinds of things are very, those are use cases. But more broadly, you are in this situation helping with cost optimization and driving revenue streams for your company right now.
Yeah.
That's what
I want to
you should be
jump in
focused
here real quick, guys, because Craig's got a really poignant question, and it's building on the whole reality of legacy equipment.
Yeah.
It's one thing when you come into an organization, you say, okay, we're building from the ground up, right? We're
Sure.
putting in all new digital input output. What do you do in terms of digital twin application for 15-year-old pieces of process equipment that have been out in the field?
Yeah, this greenfield versus brownfield, right? That's
Exactly.
how do I take a legacy equipment? Well, one of the interesting things that's actually happening is this the creation of these low cost sensors, and they do a variety of things. Sometimes they're single purpose, like I measure vibration, or I measure heat, or I measure humidity. Sometimes they're multifunction, and they're pretty low cost, from €1 to €8 per device, right? And you attach it to the device, like in and I'll say the motor or the generator. Sometimes you can wire them in, but that's one of the first changes that's happening in the legacy world that we're seeing, is what we call brownfield connectivity, is these add-on devices. And there are now suppliers all over the place, and even Siemens is getting into the act of creating what we call mind sensors that allow us to do that. Now, not everybody can afford a brand new piece of equipment, right? We understand that, right? And so this brownfield is one of these things. Now, this is one of the first items, and I want to sort of combine this question and answer with something that Sri said about, and I'm just going to touch on this reduced tolerance, as I call it. There's a reduced tolerance, not only by management, but by customers, of downtime or unavailability, right? And that's one of the first things these sensors do, is to reduce downtime and unavailability. A lot of factories, legacy factories, don't have the ability to understand really what their OEE measures are, what their KPIs around that, and are we producing at this cost or margin that we need to do that. The other thing is that, it's what Sri talked about, and we don't really we didn't talk about it up to now, is not only condition monitoring, that use case, and preventive maintenance, but what's really important, as Sri talked about, AI and bots and machine learning, is predictive maintenance. And that we can actually look at a factory floor and saying, well, if we have to send Billy or Sally in to maintain this, we need to make sure that all these machines, in a predictive way, do this at once, right? And again, it's back, why? Because it's cost and efficient and all that. The other thing that's kind of interesting with this reduced tolerance is that customers have a lower patience with wait time, and that's coupled with lower brand loyalty. We talk about this issue of cost, and it wasn't too long ago that manufacturers could get away with cost plus. I'll do a job for you, but it's cost plus. Now, because of the globalization of manufacturing, everybody is at the table, and they're shopping where they can get that lot unit one anywhere in the world. That is interesting. And that's the change in this item. I know we talked about legacy, but one of the biggest changes, of course, is the sensors and understanding how these machines are being used, and ensuring no downtime and availability. That's the simplest use case, but a lot of companies aren't even doing that, right? So, yeah.
No, Mike, I think I'll actually kind of start with a joke I heard from somebody saying, God created the world in 7 days, but he did not have an install base. So that's literally, unfortunately, the situation, right? When I think about legacy systems, I think legacy systems are always going to be there. And legacy is tomorrow. If you implemented a system today, within next 3 years, it's legacy. I think the technology cycles are going so fast, you can't really move a lot of these asset systems unless you actually kind of have service-based models. You can't really replace your systems, right? For example, if I buy a car, I have to keep it for 15 years, or you can always lease a car so that you can actually kind of get a new car every 3 years. Yeah. So in my mind, a lot of the only way you can actually kind of address that is through brownfield implementations. That's all what you can do at this point. You are not actually asking for a huge capital overlay to change your factory floor. What you're really trying to do now is how do you actually kind of put some sensors around the equipment that you have to be able to do it. The second thing that I always kind of want to talk about is about the digital twin. Everybody talks, it has a very complex thing, right? In my mind, digital twin is a means to an end. Digital twin is literally saying, how do you in some ways capture a behavior of a physical thing digitally?
Yeah.
It can be as simple as a database record for all practical purposes.
Yeah.
So I think so whenever we think about these, the legacy systems, you start with a brownfield implementation. You are really trying to focus on, if nothing else, a discoverability and the descriptive analytics. What is the system doing? How do I actually optimize it? Even if it is a human Wizard of Oz kind of view, you actually kind of have all this data to be able to go manually and turn on the system. And then you actually got to get into predictive analytics. So I think there are multiple steps to be able to get there. But I think at this point, the market is ready to be able to use some of these cheap sensors to implement brownfield implementation to make progress. At this point, I think you have to, otherwise you will lose your competitive advantage. You will, in some ways, get killed by your competition. You really need to actually implement a lot of these initiatives right now, or you should have done it, or you should have started it, but now you should do it right now.
Yeah, I want to touch on, Sri, one of the things that you said, and I think it's pretty important here about the brownfield. We know that certain machines are very costly to replace, but what's happening in this service as a business model, right? You don't buy the machine anymore, like your lease of a car. I actually buy the experience from that machine. In an earlier slide, I talked about one of Kaiser that does compression air, right? And their customers are buying compressed air, not the compressors. Does that make sense? And so their business model now. And so from a legacy point of view, the leverage against now the equipment manufacturers of actually replacing a machine and you buying the experience, you buy, one of the, we have a crane company that basically is, actually a lot of them, but not Siemens, but one of our customers is that they're now, you don't buy the crane anymore. You buy weight movement or weight displacement, and you pay by the ton. And so the customers get the crane, but as they're moving equipment, they buy, they pay, $2, I'm making that up, $2 per pound being moved, right? So they get new equipment, new technology, they get it censored, they get the understanding of how they're using it. The manufacturer of that equipment gets the instrumentation back to help their engineering and requirements and their service item. And so this is where the extended ecosystem is actually being created, where as now, from my point of view, as we are now replacing legacy equipment with service-based equipment or service-based experiences, companies that can't afford it to buy a new equipment, they're just getting the benefit of that equipment, but buying it as an OpEx rather than a capital outlay. Does that make sense? Sri, do you understand?
It totally makes sense, Mike. I think what I'm actually hearing is at the end of the day, the enterprise has two options. One is either if you really want to drive a digital transformation, if you can afford it, buy a new equipment with a service contract. If you cannot afford it, then lead with a brownfield operations to drive the outcomes with a path to new migration. Because at the end of the day, I think it's going to take a long time, Mike, for all practical purposes, with all the equipment that we have, for everything as a service model to take root, and the liability issues and the contracting issues and all of those things. It just takes, we're in the very initial stages of this model. But now you always need to actually kind of think about where would the market be in the next 5 years, next 10 years. If you cannot afford it right now, just have a path to be able to migrate to a service-based contract into the future.
And simple measures sometimes outcome large advances, like just putting sensors on and understanding what's actually happening. Energy consumption at the machine level can be monitored based upon the current on the electrical cable, the 220 or whatever cable, and that actually saves lots of money just in this item. In the type of period. So it doesn't take much to actually get some of these savings going, right? So, Greg, do you have another question? We haven't stumped Sri yet.
No, I haven't stumped you yet. All right, so how about some perspective? There's several questions in here on the impact of 5G.
Ah,
We're talking about this. How do you see that enabling, integrating, even potentially crippling operations as you're now taking that cellular service, or at least frequency and bandwidth into consideration?
Sri, you want to take that first, or?
Yeah, I can take it. I always think about 5G as two separate segments of use cases. One is assets that are in motion,
Yeah.
and assets that are fixed. So then you're actually looking at assets that are fixed, that are in really difficult situations, right? You cannot really have a pipe. You really, for example, you put an oil refinery somewhere and you really need a cellular connection. So I think in my mind, I think 5G broadly enables IoT. That I think everybody knows.
Mhm.
But it is very important for people to actually focus on what are very specific use cases where 5G complements a few other technologies. At the end of the day, it's an alternative. You're looking at edge computing as an alternative because you're doing a lot of that analytics. Second is you're actually kind of focused on connectivity like LoRa, close field communications. You're actually kind of complementing with that. And the last thing that you're also kind of doing is how do you actually kind of complement that with, is it really, are you going to pay that kind of money, right? So there's going to be additional cost. So you're actually looking at what are the use cases and what is the benefits, and can 5G be the technology that is superior than alternatives? You really need to actually kind of take that view. When you take that view, then I think, you can make a lot of money with 5G, but definitely, I'm sure that we're in initial stages of how to complement 5G with a lot of other approaches, if you make sense.
Yeah, I like just to touch on, you look at these alternatives. I think that's a good way of looking at it, because as a business item, first of all, you look at it as is it the right technology for me to invest in today, paying a premium, or tomorrow, right? When it starts to be more standardized. We do a lot of edge-based computing. And now you'd say, well, why do I do edge-based computing? It's because of this massive amount of data. I need, and I have concepts of data processing, concept of locality of reference storage, locality of reference compute, don't move data around, right? And so now I put edge devices to do this analytics, the ML languages and stuff to give me near-time, real-time analysis of what's happening on the shop floor, and make these switches. Earlier in the discussion today, we talked about the system of systems and automation and the ability to self-correct or self-heal, or that's what's edge allows us to do that because we get that power. But with 5G, the promise is that I could actually move that to the cloud, which has more compute power than my edge. And so all of a sudden, will 5G, I look at it, 5G, if that comes to a true reality and it's cost effective in the sense of implementing it in 2 to 5 years as we were seeing it, I don't see edge as being an edge technology anymore. It will transform to something else because I can move large amounts of data to the cloud very fast, very efficiently, and have endless compute power. And I don't have to worry about an edge to box and how much headroom does it have to do these analytics. Now, I just see that as a complete, no. I say, I don't want to shock the edge vendors, right? Because they're trying to make value today, but I just see a complete replacement of that. But that's just my world of thinking about what that means to us. The problem comes in is that all the hype around 5G, and Gartner's right there. I mean, you're measuring that hype in the vendors, and is it really 4G+? Is it really 5G? And by the time that customers can actually take advantage of it, guess what's going to be on the horizon? Greg, what do you think? What's going to be on the horizon of 5G when everybody can afford it? 10G.
Yeah, the question never ends. It's right. It's 5-minute ads, 4-minute ads.
Yeah. So 5G is causing a lot of disturbance, Greg, and that's one of the issues, right? It's like where digital twin was a couple of years ago. Nobody really understood it, but everybody had it, right? 5G is communication. People sort of see it. Consumers see it as what? I can download a movie in 3 seconds, right? I can get a different experience. I can do this kind of stuff. Manufacturers look at it as I can move data around really, really fast. Video type of data. This, sort of different enriched experiences in 3D and mixed reality, those kind of things I can go through. So That's from my point.
The one thing, Mike, I think I'll actually kind of piggyback on some of what you mentioned, which is service-based economy, right? A lot of these assets are becoming services. In these situations, where would the 5G go? You are actually partnering with service providers in some ways, because what you do not want, I think, is at the end of the day, it is an outcome that the enterprises are actually looking at. Yes, 5G can be an alternative. They can always buy 5G for mobile assets. But increasingly, what will happen is 5G or any other technology, edge computing, 5G, any which technologies will be part of an outcome, will be part of an experience.
Yeah.
So in these situations, how does, in some ways, 5G reduce the total cost of ownership? How does 5G provide better customer experience? If you can convince yourself as a business leader that that is the right investment, then you can convince your enterprises to be able to make those investments.
Yeah. Just another touch point on that. 10 years ago, you partnered with big players like AT&T, T-Mobile, whatever it was called at that time, Orange, and those providers for your business to be connected. You went with the T1 or, 10 years ago, T3 was a big deal, right? So they were part of your business infrastructure, right? Now what's actually happening in the service, I believe that the hyperscalers, whether it be AWS or Microsoft or IBM or even Google, they'll bring 5G to your doorstep. I think they're going to extend their infrastructure just like they're trying to extend their infrastructure with their edge capabilities, right? They're extending the cloud to almost to the desktop, which is really, really interesting. And I think they're going to say, we're the providers of 5G, and they're going to bundle it as a service just like everything else is. That's my view of the world there. So that's good. Greg?
No, very good. I mean, it's some fantastic insights. I had one that I wanted to jump back to. Let me scroll up to it. Lori had a question.
No, one question, one person. That's it.
Yeah, we're approaching the hard stop. So
damn it.
one more on here.
Yeah.
If I can find your question, Lori, we will hit it. There's a lot of them in here. And rest assured, we'll get to these. We'll roll this over to a conversation on social media, guys. If we're not.
Greg, I know you're looking for. Give me a second here. We talk about the service economy. Here's some interesting examples. I talked about compressed air, but we've got an OEM that actually is selling honing equipment as a service. Honing is a simple way of boring holes, right, into crankcases, transmissions, that kind of thing. And they sell precision cuts. So their service is a precise cut. Does that make sense? So you don't buy the machine, you don't buy the actual cutting tool, you actually buy sharp edged items. I thought that's really interesting, if that makes sense, right? So
that's a fantastic shift in mindset too. Okay. Because if you think about it, you walk, even simplistically, you walk into a Home Depot, I'm going to buy a drill bit.
Yeah.
I need to make a hole, right? So that's why I'm in there. It's not that I need the drill bit. It's right. The means to the end.
It's a whole mindset difference of, sort of user-centric in their use case versus this product-centric, right? That's what I was talking about earlier, right? It's a whole paradigm shift there. Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, I found Lori's question, so Lori will be our last one. She says here, I like Mike's reference to the shift from technology literate people to people literate technology. She says, I strongly agree with the vertical market experience is critical to success, but often vertical industry specialists are resistant to change. So her question is, how do we reorient the specialists to take greater ownership of a digital innovation?
Well, first of all, I'm going to give credit where credit's due. That as we talked about in the multi-experience is actually a Gartner trend. If I recall correctly, Shri, I said it, but I gave credit to Gartner. So maybe Shri wants to first start and I'll finish up.
No, Mike, I think, so you're absolutely right. I think, we're actually kind of seeing the interesting part with this particular question is it is about how do you enable the employees to do more, right? In some ways, I think there are a lot of these technologies that what I have seen in a lot of these enterprises are you are actually kind of training a lot of these people to learn these new types of technologies. Not only that, but you're also kind of giving them opportunities to take a bigger initiative. I don't know if there is a big different science. I think, there is outcome based. We talked about 2 or 3 different broad things. One is customer empathy is something that we talked about. Second thing that we talked about is new types of skill sets that you really need to do. And then the third is project to product based. I don't know if there is a new way I can actually kind of qualify it, but what I'm really seeing is there are multiple ways the ways of working is changing. In my mind, technology is one aspect of it. It is not just the technologies that you're actually using, it is how you use the technology is also changing. And after that, I think, Mike, you can actually kind of expand on what you're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's well, I'm going to make a little bit of a joke if I could. Laura, the whole idea around the technology that is people oriented, right, versus the other way around, is to replace your job. Now that's the joke, right? Because it's technology that's sort of taking over. But here's the item. You know, AI systems need to, one of the ways AI systems need to be, and their models within that, you know, model-based algorithms, whether it be 1D or 3D, need people to understand how to translate a business or a product behavior set. It could be a simple behavior as the switch open or closed. It could be more complex of, you know, with heat and humidity at this level and the door open, do I have to turn the air conditioner on more? I mean, that's, you know, think about, you know, air circulation and fire hazards and the safety as Sri talked about. Somebody has to understand that type of, you know, behavior of products and technology in order to get AI and machine learning to do what it's supposed to do, right? And so we have to step ahead of that, right? That's the get around the curve, right? In that situation. And so I think, as Sri is talking about, it's actually demanding more from our people, not because they're doing more at the desktop, but they need to understand more about not only the technology, but how I can harness the technology to actually deliver something and then have it start learning itself. Now that is kind of scary some days as we think about it, but at the end of the day, I see our role changing. It's an enriched role, right? As Sri talks about the knowledge worker, I think we're going to find ourselves as knowledge workers and implementers a little bit different, and it's harnessing some of these technologies and using it in the best interest. Somebody has to be the expert at the table.
No, I think I'll actually add a couple more comments, Mike. What you bring up is a really good thing. As an employee, I'm always looking at myself and saying, and we all need to actually kind of take an introspection and say, what are things that are repeatable that I do that I have some level of confidence that systems are able to do? That is a continual philosophical question all of us need to actually kind of manage and do, is are there things repeatable in what I do that a bot can do, maybe not right now, but maybe in the next 5 years? Are there places that I can actually add critical value? Almost all the time, I actually hear my manager saying, you know, you always need to look at training somebody to take your job so that you can move to better and bigger things. Unfortunately, that's something that we should be telling everybody around us to say, you know, assume that your job is going to be automated. So now let us assume our set of activities that are going to be automated. So now let us assume, take a step back and say, how do you, as a person who can deal with people or helping complex decisions or helping processes, all of those things, how can you actually kind of manage the risk and complexity of these systems? And how can you actually kind of evolve in this journey in the, human machine interaction? That's literally the situation.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic point.
I'm sorry, Greg. This is related to another trend that I talked about that Gartner also is sort of in the center of, is this hyper automation, which is taking business processes and automating with these bots, right? And then I'll say harvesting the data out of the business organization. I made reference to the digital twin of the organization and hyper automation. That's a key area that we're going to find ourselves in. You know, it wasn't too long ago we called that business re-engineering, but now it's called, you know, hyper automation. That's okay. Sorry, Greg.
No, that's perfectly fine. That's probably a great place to end it. I think we could probably carry this conversation on for another 2 hours, but thank you for taking the time to join us today. And Mike, Sri, outstanding engagement. Thoroughly enjoyed the dialogue, and I think there's a lot of value presented. So thank you. And thanks to Siemens as the educational sponsor for this event. Invite you to visit our events page for up-and-coming educational webcasts. It'll be brought to you by IIoT World. So save the dates. September 23rd, we have IIoT in automotive. October 8th, we'll have a session on supply chain requirements for NERC SIP. October 22nd will be ICS cybersecurity. And November 3rd, we're going to have a session on mitigating risks by leveraging analytics. And finally, November 19th, we'll have a session dedicated to functional safety. So if you have a suggestion or a topic or otherwise, we always welcome feedback. So please drop us a message and let us know. And if you like what you heard today, we invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, YouTube channels, and follow us on Twitter at IIoT_world. This concludes our program for the day. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Greg. Thanks now.